Hello and welcome to Gas City Gaming's Warhammer 40k lore series. In this video, we'll be continuing our coverage of the prehistory of the Warhammer 40k universe. If you guys have any lore you'd like me to cover specifically about anything you enjoy, please comment about it in the section below. But for today, let's get to our story. Biotransference and the rise of the Necrons. Armed with weapons of godlike power and starships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye through the use of quantum phase technology, the Necron tier stood ready to begin their war against the Old Ones anew. But the Catan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offered the Necron tier a path to immortality and the physical ability their race had always craved. Their diseased flesh would be replaced with the living metal of necrodermis that made up their star god's own physical forms. Their discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would then be free to pursue their great vengeance against the Old Ones and the rest of a hateful universe, freed forever from the weakness of their hated flesh. With the pact between Necron tier and Catan sealed, the Star Gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necron tier, and the great biotransference process began. Colossal bio-furnaces, built by Necron tier artifice, roared day and night, consuming weak-bodied flesh and replacing it with enduring machine forms of living metal, much like the Catan themselves. As the Cyclopean machines clamored, the Catan swarmed about the biotransference sites, drinking in the torrent of cast-off life energy and growing ever stronger. Whether the Necron tier actually realized the price they could actually pay for accepting this pact with the Catan is not known. The immortality the Catan promised would be delivered unto the Necron tier by way of the arcane and terrible process of biotransference. Vast biofoundries were constructed, and into these the Silent King's peoples marched according to the terms of the pact he made with the Catan. What blasphemous procedures the Necron tier were subjected to within the raging biofurnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and of soul, his body replaced by a shell of living metal animated by what remained of his guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the ethereal true forms of the Catan as they glutted themselves on the spiritual detritus of an entire species. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. Though immortality and nigh godlike strength and vigor were his, it had come at the cost of his soul, the effluvial remains of which had already been sucked down the gullet of a circling Catan. As Zarek watched the Catan feast on the life essence of his people, he realized the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he had in decades, the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet there was an emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The Necron tier were now but a memory, and the soulless, undying Necrons had been reborn in their place. Yet if the price had been steep, biotransference had fulfilled all the promises that the Catan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necron tier was now blessed with immortality. Age and hard radiation could do little to erode their new mechanical bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. Likewise, the Necrons now enjoyed a unity that the Necron tier had never known, though it was achieved through tyranny, and the complete loss of individuality and emotion rather than by consent. The biotransference process had embedded command protocols in every Necron mind, granting Zarek the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this unanimity, for it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos that had consumed the Necron tier empire in recent years. However, as time wore on, he grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols, lest his subjects turn on him seeking vengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. Thus the Necron tier became the Necrons. Cursed to the eternal servitude of their star gods, the Catan feasted upon the entire Necron tier race's life energies even as they made the transfers, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of the Necron tier's consciousnesses. Only a few of the most strong-willed Necron tier retained their intellect and self-awareness, and even they were but shadows of their former selves. They had been purged of so much of what had made them unique individuals. The Necrons cared not at all for their loss. All that mattered to them was that they would live forever, without disease or death, as their star gods had promised. Nevertheless, the Necron-tier species was united as never before. The process imbued in every one of the Silent King's subjects the command protocols with which he would rule over them with an iron hand. The entire species was his to command, and so it fell upon the Necrons to honor their side of their terrible bargain. Renewed by their devouring of the souls of an entire species, the Catan were unstoppable. With the legions of the Necrons marching in their wake, the Old Ones were doomed. Only one thing truly remained of the old Necron tier: their burning hatred for all the other living, intelligent species of the universe. Legions of the undying living metal warriors set out into the galaxy in their tomb ships, and the stars burned in their wake. The Old One's mastery of the warp was now countered by the Catan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered greatly in the interstellar slaughter that followed. The Necrons Ascendant. With the Catan and the Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necron tier, the empowered Catan were nigh unstoppable, and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole star systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the star gods. Necron legions finally breached the webway and assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortress of the Old Ones' many allies amongst the younger, intelligent races of the galaxy, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their voracious Catan masters. In the closing years of the War in Heaven, one of the primary factors that led to the Necrons' ascendancy was their ability to finally gain access to the Old One's webway. The Catan, known as Neadrazath, the Burning One, had long desired to carry his eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and so showed the Necrons how to breach its boundaries. Through a series of living stone portals known as the Dolmen Gates, the Necrons were finally able to turn the Old One's greatest weapon against them, vastly accelerating the ultimate end of the War in Heaven. The portals offered by the Dolmen Gates were neither so stable nor so controllable as the naturally occurring entrances to the webway scattered across the galaxy. Indeed, in some curious fashion, the webway can detect when its environs have been breached by a Dolmen Gate, and its arcane mechanisms swiftly attempt to seal off the infected spur from the rest of the labyrinthine dimension, until the danger to its integrity has passed. Thus, the Necrons, entering the webway, must reach their intended destination through its shifting extra-dimensional corridors quickly, lest the network itself bring about their destruction. Of course, in the present age, aeons have passed since the Necrons used the Dolmen Gates to assault their archenemies. The Old Ones are gone, and the webway itself has become a tangled and broken labyrinth. Many Dolmen Gates were lost or abandoned during the time of the Necrons' Great Sleep, and many more were destroyed by the Eldar, the Old Ones' successors as the guardians of the webway. Those that remain grant access to but a small portion of the immense maze that is the webway, much of that voluntarily sealed off by the Eldar to prevent further contamination. Yet the webway is immeasurably vast, and even these sundered skeins allow the Necrons a mode of travel that far outpaces those of the younger races. It is well that this is so. As a race bereft of psychers, as a result of the loss of their souls during the biotransference process, the Necrons are also incapable of warp travel, and without access to the webway, they would be forced to rely once more on slow-voyaging stasis ships, dooming them to interstellar isolation. In the wake of these victories, the Catan and their undying Necron servants now dominated the galaxy. The last planetary bastions of the Old Ones were besieged, and the intelligent races they had once nurtured became cattle for the obscene hunger of the Catan. To the younger sentient species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods were cruel masters, callously harvesting their populations at will to feed the Catan's ceaseless hunger. The Catan were figures of terror who demanded their adoration and fear in equal measure. For unknown reasons, but probably because their individual hungers for mortal life energies knew no bounds, the Catan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves for both sport and out of spite as they unleashed destructive forces beyond moral comprehension. Among the Eldar, an ancient myth holds that their laughing god tricked the Catan, known as the Outsider, into turning on its brothers and beginning their long war for ascendancy. In the course of the Catan's struggle against one another, whole planets were razed, stars were extinguished, and whole star systems were devoured by unleashed black holes. New cities were built by the efforts of millions and then smashed down once more, as the red harvests of the Catan and their Necron servants grew thin. Catan eventually devoured Catan, until only a few were left in the universe. and they competed amongst themselves for a long age. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defined by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They used their great scientific skills to genetically engineer intelligent beings with an even stronger psychic link to the warp. Hoping to create servants with the capability of channeling psychic power to defend themselves, they nurtured many potential warrior races, among which are believed to be the earliest members of the Eldar species, and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Knib, the Krork, and many others. Millennia passed as the Old Ones' creations finally bore fruit, and the Catan and their Necron servants continued to extinguish life across the galaxy. The tide turns. The Old Ones' psychically empowered servant races spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawned sorcery. Facing this new onslaught, the Catan's empire was shattered, as the psychic forces of the Immaterium were anathema to soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within purely physical patterns of electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger race's relentless advance across the stars. The Catan, unified by this great threat for the first time in millions of years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger species. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe from the warp, a plan whose fruits can still be found on the Imperial Fortress world of Cadia, in the form of the great pylons that litter the surface of that world in intricate networks and create the area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, it was only a matter of time until the Catan succeeded, and the greatest work of the Catan was begun. But before it was complete, the seeds of destruction the Old Ones had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and collective psychic flaws of the younger races threw the untapped psychically reactive energies of the Immaterium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depth of the sea of souls that was the warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Immaterium by the carnage of the war in heaven coalesced into the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the Immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. The Enslaver Plague. The denizens of the warp clustered voraciously at the cracks between the Immaterium and the material universe. Seeking new ways to enter the physical realm, the Old Ones brought forth new genetically engineered warrior races to defend their last strongholds, including the technology-mimicking Jokero and the formidable green-skinned Krork, who were the ancestors of present-day orcs. But it was already too late. The Old Ones' intergalactic webway network was breached from the Immaterium and lost to them. Several of their warp gates were destroyed by their own hands to prevent the entities of the warp from spreading to uncorrupted worlds, and the Old Ones' greatest works and places of power were overrun by the horrors of their own creations had unleashed. The most terrifying of these horrors were the Enslavers, warp entities whose ability to dominate the minds of the younger races and create their own portals into the material realm using transmuted possessed psychers brought them forth in ever greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster, as the Enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box unleashed by the creation of the younger races finally scattered the last of the Old Ones, and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the Old Ones of the Catan. Now, as the Enslavers breached the Immaterium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the Catan and the calamitous warp-spawn perils they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Whether the species went extinct or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. The Silent King's betrayal. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Zarek bided his time, waited for the moment in which the Catan would prove vulnerable. Though the entire Necron race was now his to command, he could not hope to oppose the Catan at the height of their power, and even if he did and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in heaven against the Old Ones and their increasingly potent allies alone. No. The Old Ones had to be completely and utterly defeated, before the Catan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought. And so, when the Catan finally won their great war, their triumph proved short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated, and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in revolt against the Catan masters. In their arrogance, the Catan did not realize the danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Alas, the Catan were immortal star spawn, part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each Catan instead sundered into thousands of smaller and less powerful fragments, with a similar energy signature. Yet this was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the Catan's ultimate destruction to be impossible, and had drawn his plans accordingly. Each Catan shard was bound within a multi-dimensional tesseract labyrinth, as trammeled and secured as a Terran djinn trapped in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of the rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch, save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. The Great Sleep. The Necrons had been vindicated in their pursuit of science and control over the material realm, and certainly took pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilization collapse as a result of their overindulgence of psychic power, and the end of the Catan's dominance over their race. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Catans alike, the Silent King saw that the time of Necrons in the galaxy was over. For the moment, at least. They would allow the enslavers to take what was left of the sentient life in the galaxy and let it become an interstellar wasteland. The Psyker swarm would then die away, and in time, the galaxy would evolve new life forms, who would be less sophisticated and easier to dominate. In addition, the Necrons understood that the mantle of galactic dominion was soon to pass to the Eldar, one of the physically potent races that had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the War in Heaven, and had thus come to hate the Necrons, and all their works with the burning passion that is the defining characteristic of that species. The Eldar had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened by their expenditure of lives and resources in overthrowing the rule of the Catan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldar would eventually pass, as it must pass for all those beings still cloaked in flesh. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldar's power to fade, but what mattered is that the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes, threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Eldar shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were undying and eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for the equivalent of 60 million standard years, but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. This was the Silent King's final order, and as the last tomb world sealed its subterranean vaults, Zarek destroyed the command protocols by which he had controlled his people for so long, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backward glance, Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings of the Triarch, took ship into the starless void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, eons passed, and the Necrons slept on, their machine slaves and constructs guarding them while they slept on tomb worlds that had been purged of all life to keep the enslavers from their door. This plan worked with an amazing degree of success until the Necrons were awakened by the forces of the Imperium of Man in the late 41st millennium to plague the galaxy once more. They discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilization and war much like the one they had left behind 60 million years ago. The galaxy is blossoming with life once more, but is still overrun with latent psychers and worshippers of the infernal chaotic warp energies unleashed during the War in Heaven. It will take time and a great many machinations for the Necron dynasties to regain their rightful place as rulers of the galaxy. The agents of chaos must be overthrown, the dangerous Eldar, inheritors of the Old One's mantle, eliminated, mankind subjugated, and the great work cutting off the material universe from the warp completed, before a new age of Necron dominion can truly begin. But the Necrons are ageless and undying, their technology still unmatched by any of the younger races, and time is always on their side.